So in this lesson we're going to start doing the actual philosophy, and we're going to start by looking at the problem of perception. We're going to look at a couple of theories of perception, the sort of intuitive theory of perception, should I say, and then we're going to start to introduce the idea that the intuitive notion of perception isn't quite what it seems. So specifically in this lesson we're going to take an introduction to perception, just a little bit, give it a little bit more detail than we did in the last little introductory video. And we're going to have a look at the understanding of our openness to the world, the idea of direct realism, okay? And that's what we're going to call it. We're going to be talking about direct realism, and it essentially can be described as an openness to the world. So, as an introduction, the subject of perception has always been an interesting part of philosophy. It's always been a very difficult one for people to get their heads around, which is why I'm doing an introductory course. So, essentially, the idea of perception is about our link between our mental lives, the living within our brain, and the link to the external world. How do we relate the mind to the external world, to the real life things? More specifically, how do we link the mind to mind-independent objects, an object that is independent of our minds? So perception is prima facie just a direct awareness of some kind of object in our environment. And despite this understanding of perception, there are some very convincing arguments that suggests that our openness to the world, our ability to have a direct connection with with non-independent objects, that's actually it's impossible to do that, and they're the arguments that we're going to look at in the next video and the lesson after that. And these are known as the paradoxes of perception. So it suggests that the idea of perception, the intuitive idea of perception, is actually paradoxical. It doesn't actually make sense. But what is the intuitive idea of perception? This is really the kind of direct realism argument, or the openness to the world view, okay? And it's like, when you look around, you see a number of things, okay? You see objects, you see shapes, you see sizes, you see these shapes have different colours, they have different textures. I've got a water bottle here. I'm looking at this water bottle. It's see-through, it's got a label on it, it's of a certain shape, it's of a certain size. If I touch it, it's got a certain texture. These things are showing in my mind. They are something that I can mentally picture and I can mentally understand, okay? And this is what I would characterize as perception. I'm perceiving this water bottle in front of me. That's what's going on. What's important to note is that the idea of perception is that it does seem to be a kind of direct relationship. It seems to be about a causal relationship almost, okay? There is a direct relationship between the mind and then the objects in the real world. So if we talk about the water bottle, there is a direct relationship between my mind and this mind-independent object, which is the water bottle, which I've just made a noise to prove that it is here, okay? So this is an interesting concept that McDowell calls the mind's openness to the world. The mind is open to the world. And it's really the idea that we perceive things like colours, shapes, sounds and textures, and that the perception involves you experiencing those qualities. Okay, that's what perception essentially is, and that's what we would probably describe as the intuitive idea of perception. If we were to go along the street and ask people if you were to describe perception to me, what do we mean? What does it mean? If I was to perceive something, what would that mean? And people would say, well, you're experiencing something, okay, but more specifically, you're experiencing something that is independent of yourself. So this is a very important aspect of perception when it comes to philosophy, is that this is what a perception is attempting to entail, okay? It is supposed to be our connection to the minds and real objects in the real world. So for this direct link to be outside objects and our minds to exist, okay, our minds have to be open to the world. So this openness to the world is something that has to happen. It has to be true if we're to accept that when we perceive something, we have a direct link to that thing, okay? If that makes sense. So the concept of openness of the mind is captured by the relation being direct. That's what's important. There's a direct relation between the two. And this idea of direct perception looks like this, okay? It is a perceptual relation between the mind, which I'm just going to label A on one end, and a physical object in the world, which I'm going to label O, okay? So we've got this direct relationship between A to O, okay? So my mind is directly relating information about O, the object, and that's how I perceive something. And this is fundamentally, this is what represents what we're going to call the direct realist theory of perception. It's the view that perception involves a direct relationship between the mind and something that is independent of the mind. So like this water bottle or the pen that I'm holding, okay? In the next lesson, we're going to really explore why this is quite a paradoxical notion. We're going to begin by looking at the first paradox of perception. We're going to call this the illusion argument. And really, the illusion argument is going to provide a kind of setup for the stronger version, which is the hallucination argument. And then we're going to look at, really just explain why these things mean perception is fundamentally, that direct realism is fundamentally a flawed concept.